Welcome to The Science of Creativity, a podcast about art, design, and invention. This is the second episode reporting on my visit to the annual Psychology of Creativity conference at Yale University. I'll be interviewing some of the top researchers in the field about their latest scientific research. In the previous episode, you heard from 5 creativity researchers, and in this one I talked with 4 more. Stay tuned for the special episode about the annual Creativity Research Conference. I started out by talking to Dr. Paul Silvia because he's one of the organizers of the event, along with Dr. Catherine Cotter. I asked Paul to give me an overview of the Creativity Conference. I'm here with Professor Paul Silvia. He's one of 2 program chairs of the conference. Hey, Paul, thanks for talking to me today.
Sir, great to see you.
So tell us, what's going on here at the conference?
Well, so this is a small annual conference for psychology of aesthetics, creativity, and the arts. We're a group of mostly researchers, but a few educators, practitioners who do research on psychology of aesthetics, creativity, and the arts.
Psychology of aesthetics and creativity in the arts. So is there a difference between studying aesthetics and studying the arts?
Well, it depends who you ask. Perhaps people who study one or the other sees a bigger difference than it's really there. Really, all 3 of these things kind of go together because there's just sort of a natural kinship that centers around creativity, the creative process, and appreciation for the arts, both for its own sake and what it can do for human development and well-being and education and for learning. They have much more in common than they don't. But the biggest difference is people who study aesthetics tend to focus on the emotional experience of the arts, what arts feel like. Whereas people who study the arts, these people might study more art historical things, artists and their personalities, how artists work, audience study. So they're a little bit different, but quite a lot in common.
I've spent a lot of time looking at the program, which is the list of speakers and all the topics and the research they're going to be talking about. And it's phenomenal. It's a very rich conference, over 10 pages, single-spaced. So yeah, I see people talking about research on, like you say, aesthetics and emotions, of people presenting their research on the arts. And as the program chair, you were responsible for arranging this. You're like the host, right? The curator of all of this 15 pages of stuff. It seems like a lot of work.
Well, I have to give a lot of credit to our co-chair, Catherine Cotter, who has a firm hand on the steering wheel. Couldn't do it without her or with our broader organizing committee. But I have to say, the program is only as good as the things people submit, and all the credit goes to the people who came here to share their work. One thing I'm really, really happy about is a big focus of ours is trying to cultivate and elevate our younger scholars, so graduate students, postdocs, early career people, even a lot of undergraduate students. So a big focus is trying to showcase the hottest work that's being done by our younger scholars, and a few of us old timers are giving talks, but people who are here definitely can sort of see, like, we're trying to show like what's really new and hot by kind of the emerging researchers in this field.
As a scientific conference, the main goal really is to bring together this community of scholars. And like you say, we've got some old timers, and maybe you and I would fit in that category. People who come, year after year and present the research we have. And then there's people maybe more in the middle of their career, but they're active scientists in their 30s or 40s. And then you referred to students. You're talking about PhD students who are getting doctoral degrees in how to do psychological research. Is that right?
Absolutely. I think that for any kind of scientific side of science to survive, you really need a pipeline of talent. You need to attract sort of bright people, find ways to get them into higher levels of training, like graduate school. And then for those who want to go into industry or academia, to kind of show pathways into it. And just the face-to-face community process, networking, meeting people is a really huge part of it. And a big aim of this conference is to help kind of connect people at different kind of stages of their career so they can make the connections and get the knowledge they need to kind of continue to go forward and flourish.
It sounds like pretty much any type of professional association annual conference. I mean, we're all academics and scientific researchers, but if you were, in home construction or at a law firm, your national conference would have this sort of professional activity going on.
Absolutely.
Right. So we're scientists, but we're also hardworking professionals, right?
We also like standing around in hotels with name badges and lanyards, just like everyone else.
Are there going to be exciting receptions where people can mingle and have a drink of their choice?
The earliest, before the conference was probably the biggest one. We do have a lot of sort of smaller professional development events. The one that I'm most curious about is probably the one that I'm banned from. We have a special students-only professional development event, and we very clearly told, professors keep out, students only, and one only wonders what goes on in such a shadowy place.
Right. Is that the one where they have a dance floor, a DJ?
You hear stories, very little leaks out.
For our listeners, yes, I've been to a lot of conferences, and there's very rarely a dance floor with a DJ.
Indeed.
But it has happened. It has happened.
It's not as glamorous as people think. There's more intellectual energy than dancing energy.
Right. Yes, the American Psychological Association. We're serious scholars, and yeah, of course, we're all creativity researchers, and then arts and aesthetics I think of as part of the field of creativity research. But everyone there is also, or most of them, members of the American Psychological Association. So these are serious psychological researchers who have chosen to spend their research career studying creativity.
Yes.
What sort of talk or presentation might I expect to see here?
I think you'll see a really, really wide range of things. So, for example, there's a lot of interest in applied aspects of creativity in the arts. I think sort of one side of this has to do with institutions like museums, curators, curatorial things, visitor studies, how people experience museums and audiences for all the performing arts. Some of it is more applied to education, health, well-being, maybe from traditional kind of clinical interests to how can we understand creativity in education, nursing education, engineering education. There's a large interest in assessment, to be sure, a large interest in technology and artificial intelligence, and clearly a theme of this conference that's coming out is a lot of people interested in what does creativity mean in an AI era? What do we think of generative artificial intelligence? What sense might this be creative, AI-generated art? So this is something that has clearly bubbled up and is on people's minds based on what people submitted to the program. So it's very wide-ranging, very diverse. There's 2 or 3 tracks running all at once, so people sort of pick what they like. It's pretty exciting.
I'm really impressed with what you put together with your co-chair, Catherine Cotter. It's just a really exciting conference. So thank you so much for talking with me.
Thanks a bunch and enjoy it.
Next, I talked to Dr. Hansika Kapoor about what she calls dark creativity. Not all creativity is good creativity. I mean, think about it. A lot of horrible things were novel and original. Would you say it's not creative just because it was evil? Psychologists study how the mind works. And what do you think? Would the mind work the same way with a good idea as with an evil idea? That's what Dr. Hansika Kapoor calls dark creativity. And at this conference, she received a big honor. She was invited by the organizers to give one of the featured talks. That means that she got 30 minutes, and also that no other talks were scheduled at the same time. So it was a featured event at the conference, and all 200 people were there. I'm sitting here with Dr. Hansika Kapoor, who's traveled here from India to present her research. So Hansika, could you tell us about the research you're presenting here?
Sure, Keith. Thanks for having me on your podcast. I primarily study creativity, more specifically dark creativity, which is how people get good ideas to do bad things. And usually that elicits some nervous laughter, because as soon as I say that, people think about, well, I cut corners as a grad school student, or I cut corners to jump through bureaucratic loops or hurdles. So everyone has done this at some point in time, but I study it in a more formal context to try and understand factors that facilitate or promote negatively or darkly creative ideas. So a really simple example would be coming up with a new way to cheat on a test, or coming up with a new way to find paid leave from your employer without actually having to do the work.
So this sounds like something that maybe everyone listening has done something where they maybe push the limits of the official regulations because they think it's not going to hurt anyone and I really need this particular outcome. So is that a version of dark creativity?
I mean, if done originally, then yes. So we're not talking about run-of-the-mill excuses that you're making up for not turning in your assignment, for example, but we are talking about more original ways in which you may, say, for instance, put in a USB that has a virus into your presentation computer in class so that no one gets to present just because you've not worked on your presentation. So we're talking about more original, novel, creative ways in which you can meet self-serving goals. But in addition to that, there could be more evil goals that you meet through creative means. And in my work, what I found is that deception actually has a very important role to play. Lying, making up falsehoods, fabricating information has a really important role to play in coming up with darkly creative ideas.
That makes sense. If you lie more effectively, it will. If you lie more creatively, or if you make a lie in an original way that makes it less likely someone will know you're lying. So you'd call that dark creativity?
Absolutely. And the interesting thing about lying is that you can have pro-social lying. So you can lie to, say, for instance, your spouse, telling them that they look good in a new outfit, for example, just to spare their feelings, even if you don't believe it. So you can lie pro-socially, but in a dark creativity context, what I found is that lying serves a very strategic and tactful purpose where creating a lie or fabricating information can take you closer to your self-serving or sinful or evil goal much faster as opposed to not lying.
It seems to me that you would be using the same creative processes at a mental level, cognitive psychology level. If you're being creative, it should be the same, whether you're being creative for bad purposes or good purposes. So does your brain go through a different type of creative process if the outcome is something you call dark?
We don't know that yet, unfortunately, because the dark side has been overlooked for pretty long time. But one of my current studies is actually looking at what goes on in your brain when you are coming up with these malicious lies to meet a negative goal. That said, the creative process in itself is amoral, it's blind, it's non-directional unless you start adding in all of these constraints of what your belief systems are, what you value, what your morals are. So adding all of that in is going to really steer the direction of the creative process towards a positive goal or a negative goal.
That's really interesting. And I wonder, you're not from the United States, you're from India, so you grew up in a different culture. Do you think that creativity is different somehow between countries? I mean, there's some discussion about cultural variation and creativity.
Absolutely. At least in the positive or benevolent creativity literature, what's been found is that Western societies value originality much more within the creativity definition, whereas Eastern cultures value task appropriateness much more. And that's why that dichotomy would be really interesting to study in the dark creativity side of things, because clearly a darkly creative idea or action is appropriate to the task, but only for the person who's being creative. So it actually could have social implications. So that would be a really interesting question to ask and answer.
In your presentation, you used a word, an Indian language that refers to some sort of getting around the rules, or what was that word?
Jugaad. And that's a South Asian and specifically Indian term to represent creatively cutting corners or coming up with an idea or a solution using limited resources but using it in an innovative way. So I don't know whether people in the room noticed, but I did use Jugaad to zoom my presentation to folks back home. I had kept my water bottle right at the table at the start and just propped my phone against that. So I was using Jugaad to kind of display Jugaad back.
Well, I can tell by the way you're talking about it that it sounds like something you're maybe not proud of, but it's not something you're embarrassed about. So do people think, oh, that's cool. We admire people who do that.
Kind of, yes. Because I think, and I do think that that has a cultural connotation as well, because in resource strapped environments, and when you're dealing with large populations, like, say, in India, you do have to make the most of a situation with the resources that are at your disposal. And more often than not, a creative solution emerges out of that resource constraint.
It's fascinating. And I think this body of research on dark creativity or negative creativity, you would say that's a relatively new, or you think it hasn't been studied as much as it deserves?
Oh, absolutely. It's had a very truncated and staccato kind of progression from the 90s. And I think it's only around the turn of the century in 2000 and more recently in 2010, really, when an edited volume came out on the dark side of creativity, that people really stood up and started taking notice. I've been in this field since 2012, so it's this is all that my career is really made up of. But we're far behind understanding the dark side of creativity, and I do think that our collective morality could have, well, something to do with it. So I was joking with a colleague that we do need to suspend our morality a little bit so that we can study the dark side.
When I looked at the program, the schedule of all the talks that are going on here at the conference, you're right. I think yours is the only one. Everybody else's presentation is about, should I say, happy things or good things. It's about art, or it's about children drawing, or it's about scientists making discoveries. So all of those things are not dark creativity. They're happy, light, positive creativity.
And that is the usual connotation of creativity, right? You assume lying is bad, creativity is good. So there are some terms in psychological literature that do have a valence connotation. So you would implicitly assume that, well, creativity is good, is benevolent, and it should be. But I think my line of work is just highlighting the fact that it can be bad, and especially when it's bad and surprising and novel and effective, it can do real world damage. And to mitigate against that, I think it is necessary to study it more formally and more rigorously, as opposed to what has been done in the past.
Thank you. I think it's very important research, and I enjoyed your presentation.
Thank you so much, Keith.
Last year, I gave an invited lecture at the University of Tokyo. And while I was there, I had a chance to meet our next guest, Professor Takeshi Okada. I've been following Japanese creativity research for years because there's so much great creativity research being done in Japan. And we're really lucky that Dr. Okada came to Yale University from Tokyo with a group of his Japanese research colleagues. In this interview, he's going to tell us about his study of people who mount paintings on the wall at home. This was really fascinating because it studies how we relate to art in everyday life. It's different from a lot of psychological research because most psychologists bring people into their laboratory to do some close analysis, and that really can give you a lot of rigor in your methodology, but it loses the richness of everyday life, and that's what we're going to get from Dr. Takeshi Okada's presentation. I'm here with Professor Takeshi Okada from the University of Tokyo, who's presenting research here with several different students. So tell me about one of the presentations, the research here.
Yeah, I would like to talk about the research with Kazuki Matsumoto, who is my PhD student. That is about art appreciation in context, which means that in the many psychological studies, experimental studies, often they present artwork on the computer for a short time, like 10 seconds, and people have to answer that, rate their evaluation or feelings or whatever about the artwork. We sent artwork to each people's house, and they put that work in the room on the wall, and we asked them to answer the question about artwork every day. And we found that there are big individual differences between people, and also that the change occurs drastically. Some person liking is gradually going up when the time passes, and the other case gradually going down, something like that. So that means that we think that the context matters in that kind of long-term processes, and that it's quite different findings from the previous studies on laboratory settings.
Right. I was at the presentation and I was really impressed. So the way I understand it, you give just a normal person, you give them an artwork and they agree to put it on the wall. And then every day for 1 month, they give you some sort of a survey questionnaire. They answer questions every day, right?
Right.
And you say some of them, they start liking the painting more over 4 weeks, and others, they start liking it less. So what's the difference between the people who like it more and the people who like it less?
We haven't found identified that reason yet, but we also asked them to write something about their situation. So they mentioned that because sunlight from the window makes me feel this picture more, cheerful or something like that. So that means that the context matters. And we also found out that some social event, like at the time it was a COVID-19 pandemic period. So that kind of social event affected people's feeling towards the artwork. So that art appreciation is like a kind of long-term process, interacting with environment and also own background. And I think that is quite important aspect because we want to focus on the life with art. People, if they can enjoy life with art, we talk about well-being, but well-being is not just a physical state, but more like mental state like that. So I think that life with art, to study life with art, we need this kind of approach to focus on the long-term period of artistic appreciation processes.
Right. You referred to the standard psychological approach is that you bring student or someone into your research laboratory, display a picture of art on the computer screen, then you ask them what they like. But what you have is much more powerful. You call it life with art. And when you say context influences just something as simple as the sun setting through their window, right, which you wouldn't have in the computer lab. Or maybe they get in an argument with someone in the day, so that changes their mood. Is that the sort of thing you mean by life?
Actually, I was born and raised in a house where my grandfather built. And when he built the house, he asked his relatives, who is a painter, Japanese painter, to paint the Japanese sliding door. So I was surrounded by those pictures before going to leave from my house to go to university. So at that time, every day I was sleeping in that room and I see those pictures every day, not seriously viewing it like a museum. It's more like a daily life situation. And so I was living with art. And so I was thinking that that type of experience matters a lot.
That is very powerful. So this is your grandfather who painted a sliding door.
No, not grandfather, relative. The relative, he's a painter.
Right. And this was for many, many years of your life?
About like 100 years or maybe 80. Yeah, almost.
Is the painting still there?
Yes.
That's amazing. So that's what you call life with art. And I could see how your appreciation, is that what you call it? Depreciation for the painting. But in your case, you're living with it. So you don't even think of it as art.
Right. So I didn't think about that. This is art or this is viewing art. It's just there.
It's just there. So these artworks that you had, you handed them out or gave them out to put on the wall. Who made those? Was that an artist that you know?
I don't know personally. I don't know the person personally, but he was a distant relative of my father, my grandfather. And he's a professional artist, Japanese traditional artist.
Right, right. And then in your experimental study, those paintings, who did those paintings?
Oh, that one. That one is a professional artist who is a contemporary artist living in Kyoto. And he was using this screen printing. So this is authentic artwork. We bought his prints, 20 of them, and distribute to each subject.
Right. Okay. So they're all by this this artist, Japanese artist. That's wonderful. And then where are the paintings now? Did you take them back?
Yeah, of course, we have that collection there in my laboratory.
Right. And then you'll do the study again. What do you
Yeah,
think will be your
we
next?
are thinking
research?
of doing that kind of study again and changing the variables or factors or something.
Right. Good. Yeah, I really enjoyed the presentation, and it's a very interesting research. So thank you for talking to me.
Thank you very much.
I particularly enjoyed the end of this interview when Takeshi talked about his childhood, how he grew up with traditional Japanese paintings done by a family friend. Think about what you have on your walls at home. It doesn't have to be an expensive painting. When I was in high school and in college, I had a poster of the Grateful Dead. I was a huge Deadhead. And I had an inexpensive poster with a Kandinsky painting. He's one of my favorites. I think you'll learn more about our relationship with art by studying these everyday encounters than you do by studying what happens when people go to an art museum, for example. So this was particularly innovative research, and I should add that because it's not easy to do a study where you get people to participate and give you their time for a whole month in their home to help you with your research. Those two research studies are really fascinating. If you also listened to the 5 interviews in the last episode, now you've heard 7 different research presentations. And honestly, that's pretty overwhelming for just about anyone. But then imagine the people like me who attended the conference. We attended typically over 20 presentations over 2 days. In my case, I'm the author of a book that's an overview of all creativity research, and that's called Explaining Creativity. And I really need to be at this conference so that I can stay on top of the latest research and put it in the next book that I write. If you're enjoying this episode of The Science of Creativity, I hope you'll subscribe to the podcast. I hope you'll like the show and maybe even leave a comment. This will help other people like you find the show. Now let's return to the conference and we'll hear from 2 more researchers. Dr. Angie Miller studies creative careers, the careers of people who got art degrees or music degrees or design or theater degrees. This database is called SNAP, an acronym with 2 A's, and that stands for the Strategic National Arts Alumni Project. Every 5 years, they send out surveys and they ask these alums how they feel about their college experience. What's going on with your careers right now? For example, they ask, are you still happy that you got an art degree? Did your experience in art school contribute to your current career success? Dr. Miller is going to tell us about these findings in this interview. I'm here with Dr. Angie Miller, and she's going to tell us about SNAP. It's an acronym, and I'll let you spell it out for us.
Yeah, so SNAP is the Strategic National Arts Alumni Project. And it is a data collection project where we have several different higher ed institutions. We survey their alumni from arts programs, and we ask them about their educational experiences, and we also ask them about their career experiences. And we provide that information back to the institutions so they can do assessment and curricular improvements, but then we also want to use the data for policy changes and at the aggregate level, looking at what resources we can provide to artists and looking at also what sort of skills artists are using in their careers and also what kind of different experiences are important during their education that they currently use in their careers.
When you say institutions, you're talking about art schools and design schools. These are places where people get college degrees, right?
Yeah, so we have art and design schools, but we also survey alumni from large public universities. We have some community colleges that participate. We have HBCUs and MSIs and a whole different variety as long as you are getting an arts degree. we are surveying you. So we have both undergraduate and graduate people with those two levels of degrees. And then we have a very broad definition of the arts. So we have visual and performing arts. We also have applied arts like art education and art history. We have architecture, we have design, we have media arts. So we're using a really broad definition of an arts degree.
And the research I've been doing for the past few years have been with art schools and students in art schools. So what you're doing is you're following them after they get their degree and tracking what their career, what kind of jobs they have. And is that right?
Yeah. So we ask them questions about their educational experiences and their careers. And so even those who have an arts degree but end up in non-arts careers, we look to see what kind of skills they were learning, and when we ask what were the skills you learned during your arts training, how do those apply? And we find that, a lot of times they're learning really applicable skills, even if they're working in a non-arts field. So, they're learning about things like creativity. They learn from doing a critique how to use feedback to improve a product or improve your performance, even things like research skills. They are using in a variety of different careers. We also ask them about career satisfaction, and not just, do you make a lot of money? Are you happy with the money you make? We ask, do you have opportunities to be creative? Do you have opportunities to do work that you find meaningful? Do you think that your job aligns with your interests and values? Do you have flexibility in your work? So we have a very broad definition of alumni success, and part of that is being satisfied in your career beyond just making money. We do want people to make money. We want arts alumni to be able to pay their rent. We want them to be able to pay back their student loans. But beyond that, what are the other things that they value in their careers? Because a lot of them don't get into the arts because they want to make a lot of money. Those of us in education are the same. You don't really go into it to make the big bucks, but you do go into it for other reasons. So we ask them about what are the other things in their careers that they find valuable.
Do you think that they look back and that they're happy with their choice to go to art school instead of business or engineering school? Do you ask them, hey, would you do it differently?
Yeah, we do. We ask them, overall, how satisfied were you? And a lot of times it's a very high satisfaction. And we also say, would you do it again? And we say, would you recommend your institution to someone like you? And they usually do feel like it was, good. They would do it again if they had the opportunity, and, kind of can speculate, well, that's because they did learn things that were useful in their careers, even if they didn't end up. We do, for some of the items, we get kind of a bimodal distribution. So sometimes the respondents respond to the survey because they're like, I love my school, I'll do anything, of course I'll answer this survey. And then other times they're like, oh, I've got some things to tell you about how mad I am. But that's kind of the minority. But yeah, so we get all kinds of responses when it comes to the institutions, but we also hope that the institutions take some of those disgruntled comments and figure out, okay, what are some changes we can make to make the experience better for the students going forward.
And when you say the arts, it's not just painting or architecture, but you said music, performing arts.
Yeah.
So if you're like a symphony musician, you pretty much have to have a music school degree to get to that level, right?
Right. Yeah. So some of them, have these sort of very specific career paths with the arts, but then others, they pivot. Like, for example, we found that a lot of people with dance degrees later end up in healthcare. And that's because, with a dance degree, you have a small window of time when you can be a performing artist, but they learn things, they sort of learn this body awareness, and then that takes them into, things like nursing, physical therapy. So we also try to highlight what skills they're learning and how those might sort of translate in, the top non-arts fields, because schools can use that information for career advising as well.
I think you've been doing this survey for a long time, right? When was your first graduated in your database?
So we've been doing the survey since 2008. We used to do it every year up until 2017, and now we've switched to doing it every 5 years. So 2022, and then we're looking forward to 2027. We've had historically, I think we once had someone say they were 100 years old, and they, wrote in, because we have a few open-ended comments throughout, and, they said, I'm 100 years old and I had to get my grandson to help me fill out this survey. And, they clearly we're like dictating what to type in the open-ended comment. So we have some older alumni and we, survey all living alumni. If they're an alumni, do you have an alumni record for them? Then we try to contact them to get their information. So there's a lot.
That is a lot. So for someone who's listening to this podcast who hasn't heard of SNAP, if they want to get in touch with you and get on the list, how could they reach you?
So you can just Google SNAP. It's with 2 A's, SNAAP, and then snaparts.org is our official website, and you can check out all of the reports that we've released. There's kind of a timeline and history, and then we've also got a casebook of examples that schools have used, how they've used their data to make changes. We also have a newsletter that comes out. You can sign up for the newsletter. You can look at all the institutions who participated and get an idea of, what the sample is like. And then we also, if you're a researcher and you want to use the SNAP data from 2022 for your own research, we're making that available to people. You just have to fill out a proposal form, and there's some paperwork to make that happen. But we really do want people, if they have a research question that aligns with the data that we have, we want them to be able to look at that with our data.
Well, thank you. You're doing really great work.
Great. Thank you so much.
You can learn a lot about creativity by interviewing people who've graduated from art school. The SNAP project really is a brilliant idea. I mean, who's going to know more about creativity than someone who's involved in a creative career? Who's going to know more about the benefits of arts education? Dr. Miller's research is another example of how innovative and how varied creativity research is at this conference. I wrapped up my interviews by talking to Dr. Taylor Worley. His research topic is about relaxing and being present for art. He calls it slow looking. When most people go to an art museum, they walk through it pretty quickly. You don't stand still for very long, and they don't spend too much time with any one painting. But people who have a strong relationship with art tend to spend a lot more time looking at each artwork. For example, I have a colleague. Last year, I was at a conference in Buffalo, in New York, and one afternoon, we went to the art museum together. That's Professor Kim Sheridan, and she studies creativity in maker spaces. At the beginning, she warned me that she tends to spend way more time in museums than other people. And she wasn't kidding. I thought I spent a lot of time in front of paintings, but when I was done with the whole museum, I texted her from the exit from the lobby, and she texted back that she was still less than halfway through, so that I should go back to the conference by myself. And that was even though I spent a fair amount of time myself. And I try to do what Dr. Worley calls slow looking. He's going to talk about some innovative research and how he studies what happens when people take their time with art. I'm here with Dr. Taylor Worley, who's giving a presentation here at the conference. Taylor, tell us about the research you're presenting.
Yeah, I'm giving a presentation called Art of Attention, and it's a study on slow looking with contemporary art. So I should back up and say my research over the last few years has been supported by the Templeton Religion Trust, and as a part of a research program they've been doing for some years now called Art Seeking Understanding, where they're testing the claims of aesthetic cognitivism, which is a philosophical school of thought from analytic philosophy of art that basically claims that the arts are valuable in a lot of different ways, but they're principally valuable to us in that they provide unique forms of understanding or knowledge. So my connection to that research program really came around the idea of testing conceptual art. So much of the contemporary art world is influenced by this unique form, conceptual art, that's happened in the last 30 years or so. Anyways, so I partnered with a neuroscience colleague on my campus. So I'm an art historian, and we got together to do some field research on people's experience of contemporary art. So our hope, or our thesis, or I guess I should back up and say our hypothesis or our hunch, was that the contemporary works that might seem very difficult or obtuse or confusing at first glance can actually be valuable to us in the form of something like a ice plunge, or intermittent fasting, some kind of short-term stressor for the imagination that might have long-term benefits. So with that, it was just a pilot study, but we measured emotional self-reports and took heart rate data. So we're looking at heart rate variability. My neuro colleague does a lot of neurophysiology. So we're trying to see how stressed out we could get people standing in front of works of difficult or confusing examples of contemporary art. And this is, hopefully part of the broader interest in getting people back to museums after the pandemic and offering the museum as a space for well-being or as a de-stressor. We wanted to contribute to that conversation by saying, well, the contemporary art, the strange stuff that sometimes people avoid, it can be valuable as well.
Right. So it's you said difficult and conceptual.
Yeah.
So you said it makes people anxious or stressed if they're looking at a really challenging painting. So it's not a landscape like a impressionist painting.
Exactly.
People love to relax and look at those, but you're talking about challenging work. Yeah. And your hypothesis is that this work will have some benefits, even though people get stressed when they look at it. But what are the benefits of looking at difficult art?
Yeah, what we're aiming for is trying to see what kinds of degrees of like patience or charity or hospitality people might be forced to engage with if they're trying to stay and understand the work. So in that study, what we really looked at was just measuring the time that people would be in front of works. We gave them a slow looking task. So we said, stay with these pieces for about 5 minutes, which for some people felt like an eternity. For others, they could stand there longer, just to see like what kind of resources would they have to draw upon in terms of memory or some speculation or just making their own connections with the work, especially if there's not information that's been provided to them, by the wall didactic. So the funny thing is the results we got were the exact opposite of what we expected. So at least the results were clear. Instead of people sort of having low, high frequency heart rate variability as an indicator of stress, what we found was that the time, and we had two different groups. We had a group of non-experts and a group of experts go through. We found people were actually in rest and recovery in front of the works of art. So that's forced us to really go back and look at our experimental design and see maybe we've given them too much of an orientation. I was doing orientations with the groups that went through, trying to explain slow looking. So I think it might have calmed them down too much before they went in. So that we've got a lot more work to do on that.
I'm intrigued by this notion of slow looking.
Yeah.
Could you say something more about that?
Yeah. I think it's a term that a lot of museums today are using. A lot of people that teach art courses to general undergrads like myself, we use it. I mean, it's sort of a term of art these days. I don't know if there's like a settled definition about the term. Slow looking is really just a process of getting the participant to slow down, and instead of making a judgment or a kind of snap assessment of a piece, actually spend lots of time with it and keep on noticing what they're noticing as long as they can. The average museum goer spends 8 seconds with a work of art. We've all kind of thrown that statistic around for years, and it feels very true. It feels like the experience of a lot of folks. So getting people to slow down, which I think worked against us, because I think we got them to slow down and they were okay with not understanding what was going on with the artwork, which wasn't what we were after. But we're grateful for having some clear findings. Yeah, but slow looking, I think it's just what people thought of looking 100 years ago before smartphones, when we had more of an attention span. So,
well, maybe that's a positive finding. It's not your hypothesis, but that they became more relaxed or more in a resting state as a result of looking for 5 minutes.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
maybe that's
Yeah.
a positive thing. Maybe that's good.
I know we're trying to write it up right now and submit it for publication. And I think because we've had kind of these opposite findings than we expected, it's made us kind of go back to have more conversation about, well, what could have been happening that's so different than what we thought. And maybe the intervention was not the, putting them in front of the challenging work. Maybe it was getting them prepared to be in front of the challenging work. So that's what we're looking at right now as we're trying to write it up.
If someone doesn't understand modern art and you ask them to look at it for 5 minutes, I think they might just tune out because they don't know how to look at it.
Yeah,
so
exactly.
Your orientation, give them some advice, like here's how you should look at a painting when you're looking at it for 5 minutes.
Yeah, well, I mean, most of these works were really non-traditional, so there weren't any paintings involved. Actually, I mean, we randomized the set of works that we wanted them to look at, but we were steering them toward the more unusual. So, I mean, there were sculptural pieces that just looked like everyday items, but then they'd been manipulated. What we're looking for, Robert Soslow has, I found his work helpful in the notion of visual dissonance. So the experience of being in an art museum or kind of an art context and expecting certain things like beautiful paintings or aesthetically pleasing paintings, and then coming around the corner of the gallery and seeing, oh, there's a urinal on the pedestal.
Right.
This is Duchamp's fountain from the very early 20th century. But that strategy of taking something out of the real world and kind of putting it in the museum context, maybe manipulating it or appropriating it in specific ways to get people to look at it as art. To my mind, that is tough cognitive work, and to your point, not a lot of people are interested in that, and they do check out and they say, where are the pretty paintings, and I'm all for pretty paintings, don't get me wrong. I'm happy that we have this, we're kind of living in this moment of like a mindful art programming movement where people are thinking about the museum a little bit differently, which is great. I just want to be an advocate for the contemporary work that is more heavy lifting cognitively, potentially. So yeah, our works were pretty non-traditional and did kind of interrupt those tried and true postures and practices of engaging in artworks in a museum. But I think I reassured them too much on the front end, and then they were not stressed out enough for us.
Can you describe one of those works?
Yeah, sure. So one of those works is like a key piece of the art. So this study happened at the Art Institute in Chicago. So we had a lot of works to choose from and a big space, which was a lot we were trying to be a very non-intrusive team. So, there were a lot of challenges, but we had a lot of opportunities with the museum space to work with and a lot of access. So we're very grateful for the access we got. But one of the pieces that we featured in the study is a piece by Felix Gonzalez Torres, who's a conceptual artist, a Cuban-American. And when you encounter in the museum, they're all untitled with just tiny references to distinguish them as untitled works. But when you encounter in the museum, it is a pile of individually wrapped candies on the floor.
Wow.
Yeah, just a pile. And it sort of adapts to the space. And this is a nightmare for, the parent with young children, just like trying to get them out for some enrichment at the museum to come around the corner. And there's a pile of individually wrapped candies sitting right there. Well, the good news is it's an interactive piece, so you're meant to take a piece of the candy.
You're supposed to take a piece.
That's right, yeah. So initially, I mean, he's no longer with us. He passed away in the 90s, but he instructed security guards to be kind of these intermediaries and let people know that they could take a piece of the candy. So I could get into all the layers of that, but just as a visually dissonant experience, right? You're expecting things to be hanging on the wall or sitting on pedestals. And here you have just this loose pile of individually. Now they're nice to look at because they're in this beautiful aluminum foil and they're different colors. Some of them are all the same color. This is a series that he did in his practice. But we don't expect to see individually, a big pile of individually wrapped candies on the floor. So that was one that we had to include in this study.
I think I'd have trouble looking at that for 5 minutes,
and
but I don't see how that would be cognitively challenging.
Yeah,
just to try to think, why is this in an art museum? What makes it
certainly that. What I theorized was kind of a cognitive framework for engaging with conceptual works. So there is this initial phase of confusion. And that, I think, is the point at which our participants were incentivized to stay or asked to stay. But I think the typical museum goer is going to encounter a piece like that, and they're going to think, oh my gosh, what's going on here? Is this worth my time? And so they're doing a kind of a quick cost-benefit analysis and saying, let me move on to something I like to look at, or that doesn't confront me with all these questions. But if the person stays, and if they say, well, no, there's something happening here, this is in the museum for a reason, it's not an accident, then I think they move into another phase of what I would call integration, where they're trying to integrate the thing before them with like prior experiences, things they've seen in other places, like, oh, well, this is a strange work of art, but I've seen some strange works of art before. And when that happens, not only do they have like the formal appearance of the work, but they have like other people, to see how other people are interacting with it, especially with the candy piece, seeing other people take a piece of candy, certainly it changes the affective scenario there. And working with the wall didactic. So for instance, that piece in particular has a very specific wall didactic that is approved by the foundation for the artist. And there's layers of the story that the participant can integrate with. But because they've had to do that kind of work, the final phase I would see as a productive one, the phase of production where they've made a personal connection with the work of art. And even though it might not be the prettiest painting they've ever seen, they're still thinking about it on the way home. And they're still thinking about it years later. And they tell people, especially the candy piece, we saw this over and over again. It's a fun piece to see in the summer. So you routinely see people bringing loved ones or friends to like, oh, look at this, you can take a piece of the candy. So,
Oh, thank you for the interview.
Dr. Worley's research really resonated with me because of my own studies of artists and designers. My latest book is called Learning to See, and it's about how artists learn to look at art and design in ways that are different from the rest of us. I think that Dr. Worley's research shows us how anyone can learn to look in new ways. I can't imagine a better way to end this episode about the Creativity Conference. If you made it this far and you'd listened to these 2 episodes of these 9 interviews, then congratulations, you're an honorary creativity researcher. You've really done a deep dive with me. These 2 episodes provide a window into how scientific research gets done. Scientists work really hard, and we do rigorous and innovative research. But we're all at different universities, and we rarely see each other. It's different from a research lab in a company, where everyone works in the same building, and maybe you eat lunch together, or perhaps you meet at the coffee machine. But when you're a university researcher, and you're at a particular university, say in the Department of Psychology, there's almost never more than one creativity researcher. After all, a psychology department has to cover all branches of psychology because they have to teach their undergraduates about every kind of psychology. So you really can't afford to hire more than one person of any kind. So you only have one creativity researcher, and you're the only one. I mean, we send a lot of emails to each other, and we exchange drafts of our research studies. We might even co-author on something, even though we don't see each other for the whole year or 2 that we're working on it. So once a year, it really makes a big difference to get together in person at this creativity research conference. We get to share our latest findings with each other, but really get some special kind of interaction where, unexpected ideas might pop out, or we'll realize something that our colleague is working on that we didn't know about because it's so new and innovative. And it's really a chance to make the whole field of creativity research move forward. There's another big difference between scientific research and research in the private sector. In a company, when you come up with something new and different, you're more likely to keep it secret so other companies don't steal it from you. You don't want the other companies to know how far along you are or where you're going next. But among university researchers, we believe in sharing and collaboration. That's the norm for academic research, and we're not doing this kind of research to make money. I'll just say that no one flew first class to get here to New Haven, Connecticut for Yale University. We just all do this because we love discovering new things, and we love doing it with other people who care about the same things that we do, advancing the science of creativity. Honestly, I felt like I was taking a big risk by doing these 2 episodes because the research really is pretty advanced, and some of these presentations used some technical terminology. But I just thought the conference was so exciting. I think there's got to be some people out there who really want to go deep and get geeky about creativity research. So I thought I'll just go ahead and make these 2 episodes, and whoever out there who's interested, they'll listen. Other people, they'll move on. So if you like the episode, please leave a comment so I know, who out there likes this sort of thing. If you'd like to learn more about any of these researchers, or if you want to see the conference schedule and the complete list of the research presentations, it's all available on the conference website, which I have in the episode notes. Feel free to reach out to any of these researchers and send an email to them. They're usually pretty excited when they get an email from someone who's interested in their research. I mean, really, there aren't going to be thousands of people listening to this podcast. I don't know, but they're not going to get thousands of emails. They're going to get a couple of emails, and they're going to love hearing from you. I mean, think about it. How much effort did it take you to listen all the way to the end of this 2nd episode? You're one of the people who really care about creativity research, and you're a true fan of the field. So thank you so much for listening for both of these episodes and learning so much about the science of creativity. Thank you for listening to The Science of Creativity. If you liked this episode, I hope you'll subscribe to the podcast, and please rate the show because that helps others like you hear about the show. Please write in the comments if you have requests or ideas for future episodes. I'll see you next time on The Science of Creativity for insights and inspiration about art, design, and invention.